Okay, looks like we're live. So hi everyone, welcome to the first KOGOD faculty on COVID webinar. I'm Anna Morser, the Content Marketing Coordinator on KOGOD's Marketing and Communications team. And I'm here with my co-host, Elizabeth Thomas, who is our Assistant Director of Events. For the first webinar in our series, we're joined by Professor Heng, the Director of our KOGOD Cybersecurity Governance Center. We're going to discuss some of the ways that the COVID-19 pandemic has already changed cybersecurity and what the future landscape of cybersecurity looks like. At the end of the interview, we'll have some time left over for questions from the comments section. So please leave them below. We'll try to address as many as possible. And now, without further ado, here's Professor Heng Zhu.
Hello.
Thank you, Heng. So to start off, most of your work with the Cybersecurity Governance Center is research-based. What does your research process look like right now?
Thank you for this question. So to start, or to give everyone a context about the research, I would talk about the general steps for any general research activities, which also apply to the cybersecurity research context. So for any general scientific research, we often have a three-step workflow. The very first step is to come out a research question, something you want to solve, a problem, a particular problem or phenomenon that you see from the news that driven your curiosity, right? So first you need to have a research question. And after you have the research question, the second step is to conduct a comprehensive literature review, to review what other people, what other researchers have been doing. And interestingly, sometimes our research actually stopped at this phase because you may find that, a direct solution that developed by other researchers to address your own research question or to solve the problem you want to solve. And sometimes if you still can't find a solution, but after doing a literature review, you can identify the gaps, right? What has been done, what hasn't been done. And then followed by that, you develop a research plan to address the questions, to come out your hypothesis, or to collect the kind of data to address your research question, and doing data analysis and so on to finish the whole research process. So this is a typical research process look like for any type of research activity, which also apply to cybersecurity research.
Thank you. So how has the research process been affected since COVID-19? Have there been any positive changes or negative changes at all?
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned these two sides of an event, right? Like COVID-19 we are experiencing now. From the positive side, as I mentioned, that any research starts with a research question. And COVID-19 gives all of us, right? No matter you are scientific researchers, medical researchers, social scientists, or other scientists, we are all puzzled by a lot of things that embedded with this event, ongoing crisis, COVID-19, right? Where this starts from and how long it will last, why we see different patterns across different countries. And we have so many intervention strategies which might be more effective in what kind of context. So I think positively, yes, so of course, it is a crisis, everyone impacted all of our lives. But positively, from scientific research perspective, it gives a lot of research questions to researchers to work on in a very urgent manner. So we need more resources of data. We need more tools to effectively analyze these data. But also, there are negative consequences of impact of COVID-19 to our research activities. As I mentioned, that a solid research agenda would often, lead to a literature review. What does literature review mean? It means that, you try to test out your ideas, you contrast your research question with other people's ideas, other people's solutions. And in the regular context, we often go out to conferences to talk to other researchers, right? To share our ideas with all the leading experts in this world through professional research meetings so that we know what is right, what is wrong, or what kind of things, I overlooked in my own thinking process. So all these brainstorming activities, face-to-face brainstormings and physical conferences have been postponed or stopped because of the travel bans. And we no longer have the luxury to brainstorm research ideas in a face-to-face fashion or in a large scale of research meetings, right? For example, sometimes I presented my ideas to a group of 100 people, and now I don't have the luxury to do that in a face-to-face interaction. And then the second negative consequences would be to some researchers, like social scientists or human-computer interaction researchers who actually study, the human factors, who used to run lab experiments. Now they don't have the environment to run their lab experiments anymore. We are moving our class to online. So there is no way of inviting human subjects to the physical labs to do all different kinds of lab experiments. So that's another negative consequences to I think, social scientists or human computer interaction researchers in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. Do you feel that the COVID-19 has slowed down the cybersecurity field at all because the social scientists aren't able to perform certain experiments and things like that?
Yes, there are, pros and cons and good and bads and all two sides, for every single phenomenon we're facing now. I think COVID-19 slowed down some type of research activities. As I mentioned that, social scientists or human computer interaction researchers, they need to study effectiveness of some kind of intervention or some kind of solution or some kind of, software or applications. And for those researchers, the lack of physical interaction with their test users, they lose the opportunity to observe their behavior about how they interact with a tool, how they utilize certain kind of app. So that's the unfortunate side to social scientists, researchers who are interested in human factors. But from some other perspectives, COVID-19 also brought more opportunities to cybersecurity researchers, not only just the ideas, but also the rapid shift to the remote work, right? And more resources have to devote it to the priorities to support the business continuity as well as remote work. And, companies put a lot of resources nowadays, right, to enforce these and to make the transition to the virtual work and the digitization in a smooth way. So these are I wouldn't say COVID-19 slowed down the cybersecurity field in general. Instead, I will say probably the opposite. It gives a lot of priority and attention to cybersecurity professionals and technologists, as well as human factor, researchers, and which makes their work more important and urgent in the context of, physical distancing and moving everything on to online.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. How might COVID change the way we think about cybersecurity? You mentioned many businesses and companies paying attention to that.
Yes. So it's a challenge. And we don't have a choice. I think all the business, they don't have a choice. In order to survive in the COVID-19 crisis, companies have to move everything online, and they don't have a choice. So they have to work in a nonstop fashion to making sure that the remote access is enabled for their employees, for their workers. But meanwhile, the remote access would also open up the cyber threats to a lot of companies. And, in the past, you could enforce a lot of access control, not only through the cyberspace, but through also physical restriction of access. For example, for certain companies, for certain types of sensitivity of data access, they may just limit certain employees to certain buildings or certain rooms. Nowadays, you cannot do that, right? You cannot have people coming back to a building and then you lay out the different physical access to different parts of the buildings and to access different types of data. No, everything has to be to the cyberspace. So this creates a huge challenge for all of us to think about from the cybersecurity and data access perspective.
Mhm. What kinds of new information do you expect will need to be protected right now during the pandemic as well as post COVID? Um,
I think one of the current debate in this country is about the tracing, right? To what extent we could trace people's movement, behaviors, and health conditions in order to better prevent COVID-19 outbreak. Um, that's a hard question. That's on one hand, we are going back to the old or conventional trade-off between privacy protection and public safety. Okay, that's a trade-off we have been doing for a long time. And now we have to do that again. Um, some people who actually opposed to the idea of utilizing aggressive contact tracing in this pandemic, particularly in this country, was because of their worries about data privacy protection. They worry about, how long we'll keep this information, right? For example, if we trace people's movements, um, behaviors, right? They do what they do, everything in the physical movement online for quite a while. For example, for certain months, how long we can keep that data, to what kind of stakeholders we can share that data to better analyze the situation for us to address this crisis. So all these questions we have to carefully think about, right? Once you collected the data, let's put that way, it's impossible to 100% delete that data from cyberspace. So that's the challenge. That's why people have reservations for data collection, for contact tracing now.
Absolutely. So earlier you mentioned that when physically employees could be at their companies, they were restricted. There were physical boundaries between where they could go to protect data and different information. Now, with people working online, how can companies continue to secure their remote workers' data, whether it be different levels of employee or also keeping hackers away from their data on their computers at home?
There is an old saying that there's no 100% security. So as long as we have data and we are prepared for the chances of losing it anyway, the question is the possibility of losing the data, right? How likely we may lose the data. That depends on what we do, what we react, what action, what plan we have in place. So I would say the regular cybersecurity compliance policy, for example, access control policy, right? Carefully define what kind of users can have what kind of privileges to access what kind of databases within that company. That is important, enforcing VPN. So all the employees have to utilize VPN in order to get access resources to the companies. All these conventional, traditional policies and procedures and technologies are very, very important. And the COVID-19 facilitate the remote work culture or the norm to all business. That's probably something new. That's something new that companies have to think about how to make this separation at employees' home as well as at employees' own devices. For example, I have my personal device, right? And nowadays, for the convenience of my work, I may also install my company's email clients, email application on my phone. How that works? And my phone, my 6-year-old may use my phone for playing games as well. And on my phone, I have my company's assets, resources, and meanwhile serve as a game devices for my toddlers, my 6-year-old. Um, So how to separate this? How to separate? How to build a boundary? Among these employees' own devices. That's a challenge, but fortunately, there are well-established solutions. For example, on the mobile devices, the well-established business practice is to utilize sandboxing, which means that you have a sandbox to create to the sandbox is implemented by running the software in a restricted operating system environment. For example, you should have a sandbox to only run your company's email application. And by doing that, you build a boundary, so-called boundary, right, between the company's email app versus other, game apps for your kids on your own devices or your home devices at home.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's a great point, especially with the lines of work and home life being blurred. So, what are the first steps that a company or business can take if they suspect a cybersecurity breach? Is there anything that they can do to limit the damage that can be done?
yeah. Well, fortunately, I think nowadays all the business have the awareness of data breach and the importance of data breach, and I would say majority of the companies they already have a plan, right? They already have a data breach incident response plan in place. So once they suspect something is happening, they need to carefully determine what kind of data is at risk, and they have to access the scope and the nature and the types of data which might be at risk, right? For example, there are certain types of data which are subject to the cybersecurity, data breach incident laws in different states. For example, if your data contain identifiable personal information such as social security number, you have to notify these customers, right, within a certain short period of time once you confirm you are at the breach. And you have to, the company have to quickly work with the IT, with the cybersecurity experts, as well as the legal counsel at a PR firm, PR teams, right, to work on the post, breach plan response, how they communicate this incident to the public, how they communicate to the consumers whose data are at risk. So all these they have to carefully think about when they work on a potential or try to investigate a potential data breach incident.
Mhm. And you mentioned notifying clients whose information may have been compromised, and that brings up a great point. We're seeing more services and businesses operating online, meeting clients online with telehealth, schools, etc. So, how can security for patients um, and client information be also better secured online? Many of this and most of this information may already be available online for doctors' offices and other places, but when you add in the video factor, Zoom is maybe not always the most secure avenue for meeting like a doctor's patient online. So, what can be done there?
Well, that's a good question. That reminded me of my recent experience. I had some minor health issue, and because of the pandemic, I dare not to visit my physician physically. So what I did was schedule a Zoom meeting. So in that room meeting, as you may imagine, right, or conversations were happening in the cyberspace where we used to in a very secure physical space. I talked to the nurses, practitioners, physicians about my health condition, and they give me suggestions or prescribe the medicine, medications, and so on. And in my recent experience, in terms of remote visiting of my physician, uh, I think that brought the huge amount of convenience. But I also know that everything, all the conversations were carried out in an online channel, which may lead to certain cybersecurity related risk, right? The data breach, what will happen in that case? And more interestingly, in that conversation, the physicians also share with me some information sharing, relaxing of the rules due to the pandemic. For example, my physicians, the team is with the Virginia hospital, and I'm now living in the house in the Pennsylvania, right? In the usual business environment, my physicians can never prescribe any medication and send these medication prescriptions to any pharmacy in Pennsylvania. That's not allowed because their license only allow them to practice in Virginia, Maryland, and the DC. And nowadays, with the pandemic, right, to facilitate this medical data exchange and medical data flow, these restrictions were relaxed. So now physicians can easily transfer information from one state to another. And this also creates, I mean, once we have the free flow of information, of course, as a patient, I enjoy the convenience of getting the prescription delivered to the drugstore that, nearby. But on the other hand, I would think about the information used to be, banned. Now you opened up more information exchange across different states, across different stakeholders, right? What are the implications of this? How long we can continue doing this? And once my healthcare information was transferred from my physicians in Virginia to pharmacy here in central Pennsylvania, how long they can keep that, and what to do with my data after this pandemic and after we're going back to normal. So all these are kind of interesting questions we have to carefully think about.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the convenience of telehealth. And I think that we're finding that handling some more meetings, appointments, work obligations over Zoom has been quite convenient. But of course, it does bring up challenges, boundaries, and questions with blurred lines. So, do you expect that more services will continue to be based online post COVID-19? And what kinds of services might be transitioning to a fully online platform?
Hmm. I would say, or my personal perspective of this rapid digitization of services across different industry sector, it's amazing because you have to do this rapid digitization. Otherwise, you will lose, right? We see many retailers are actually struggling, and some, are in the bankruptcy situation. It's just because they can't really digitize themselves or the industry in a rapid fashion. So I would say this like a real field experiment of testing or testing the effectiveness of digitization to different industry sectors and how rapid we can transitioning to the cyberspace and doing everything virtually. That's very fascinating to observe that across different industry sectors. And I believe it really depends, right? Depends on the industry sector. I believe after this field experiment, if for some industry sectors they realize that, after moving everything online, it works well. It in the long run, it saves the budget. And meanwhile, since they already put a lot of resources to quickly move everything online to cope with this COVID-19 crisis, the sunken cost is there. And why not continuing offering this online services? So post COVID-19, I believe for a lot of industry sectors, there are a lot of things or game changers and revolutionized services will emerge. And I don't know what that is. And I recently also heard stories about the housing market. And because of the pandemic, some states actually banned, the customers to view the houses, right, in physically. So a lot of companies starting offering the virtual, house showing software and applications. And people view the houses in a 3D scenarios utilizing virtual environment. That actually shows well. I heard so many interesting stories that nowadays customers just bought the houses without even physically visiting those houses, just experiencing everything through the 3D showing of the houses, and they made the offer. And we all know that the housing market now is pretty hot, right? A lot of people try to move into the big houses, and the housing market apparently as of today wasn't affected by the COVID-19. And maybe because the virtual showing was made available to a lot of customers, and which facilitate a lot of sales in the market. So if this goes well, we have to think about, right, the business model. We run this traditional business. If we can view everything online, okay, to buy the house, purchase everything, finish all the paperwork, why we are paying 6%, to the agents, right? Shall we actually utilize that portion of money to really create more virtual platform to facilitate this transaction process? Can we actually, giving back these to the customers? All these are interesting questions for us to think about. And this may be opportunity for a lot of conventional industry or business to rethink about their business models after the COVID-19.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be interesting to see how things go. I'm looking for a house myself right now, and it's been a very different process as a first time home buyer to be looking at these 3D floor plans online and spin the house around and go into the closets without leaving my couch. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. And now we do have about 5 or 10 minutes left for questions. So my co-host Elizabeth will come on and see if there's some questions in the comment section. So yeah, do we have any questions for Heng in the comment section?
Hi. Thank you, Heng, again for sharing with us. We have several questions actually that came through via email and through the comment section. And the first question is, as summer is coming to an end and students are returning to school, how can we improve the security of online learning spaces for students K to 12 and in higher education? For example, keeping uninvited guests out of Zoom events and classrooms.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the news media discussed this, a few months before, when we quickly moved to the Zoom environment for doing everything online. And I would say Zoom already developed some features to address this situation. So my recommendation is, for students, if you are going to schedule your, meetings, room meetings with your classmates, friends, and your faculty members, make sure utilizing the password function. So making sure that only intended audience will participate in your discussion at meeting. Or you could, if the size of the audience is not that huge, you could use the waiting room feature to admit your intended audience.
That's a great idea. Thank you. Next question is, sometimes spam emails appear to come from a trusted source. What are some keywords or clear indicators to help determine the authenticity of the email?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we are seeing more and more phishing emails in the context of COVID-19, right? That's a eye-catching word. And sometimes people just, their attention has been dragged into that subject, and they may actually fall into certain phishing attacks. I would think about three components of any email message. One is sender, second is content of your email, the third is attachment. So pay full attention to these three different elements. For sender, if you want to check whether the people or the sender is legitimate, for example, if a bank is sending you some email, you have to really make sure that that email is coming from the bank. What you do, you can check their email addresses by simply moving your mouse to The from address, right? Making sure that it is coming from the bank instead of certain personal email accounts. So that's check about the sender. The second is about check the content, right? Most companies or legitimate business will not send you email asking for passwords or credit card information or credit scores or tax numbers or any kind of these sensitive information through emails. So if you kind of received the emails that asking all these sensitive information, that's probably means that these are the phishing emails, then you should really not respond to. And then the third important component is really be careful about attachment, right? Don't open any attachments from the sender that you're not familiar with or you are not expecting, right? So so these are the sender, content, and attachment are the three major elements you should carefully pay attention, making sure that the senders is from someone you're expecting. The content does not really ask for sensitive information through emails, and the attachment, be careful. Don't open any attachment if you don't know the sender.
Those are great tips. Thank you. So we have a little bit more time. Our last question that we'll be able to cover today is, earlier you mentioned the term sandboxing. So we've recently learned that Amazon employees have been mandated to delete the TikTok app. Do you expect that employees may need to monitor their employers will need to monitor their employees' digital usage now that their free time is a little bit different and work and life culture are more intertwined?
Yeah, I think there are two major components in that question. One is the TikTok's data practice. The second is, to what extent employees shall actually monitor, being monitored by their employers, right? So regarding the first, the TikTok's access, recently, right, we learned that TikTok, this particular mobile app, actually have the access to mobile phone users' clipboards without their permission. I think this practice is questionable, is not appropriate. With such kind of access to a user's clipboards, this particular app could read any text the user has copied. So think about the implication of that. If I am the Amazon or any company, right, really allow the employees to install the email client to their personal devices, and meanwhile have apps, other third-party apps, which collecting the clipboard information, right? It probably means that some content of the email, if the frequently utilizing clipboards, will be leaked through these mobile apps that has nothing to do with the company's legitimate business. So from business perspective, right, they have to think about building a boundary. And one easy solution is to have the sandbox, so that the email client has the email apps run through that sandbox, and so that you won't allow any third-party apps to collect any information that concerning that email access. So that's one solution. You also mentioned about from the organizational security policy perspective, right? Whether a company should monitor the employees' use or their behavior. I would think that's a classical question in terms of workplace privacy. If you are utilizing a device that is owned by your company, and you should expect minimum amount of privacy there, right? Because the company provides you the device, the company provides you all these access and softwares, and for a lot of company-owned devices, they may have already built-in cybersecurity features which include monitoring or detecting abnormal patterns, right? They are doing that for their business purposes. Just in case that your device was compromised, they can quickly detect that your device was hacked. So they have a legitimate reason in terms of why they're building these so-called monitoring or abnormal pattern detection packages in the company-owned device. But another question that embedded with this question is, what happened to your personal devices, right? I mean, I own my personal phone. right? That has nothing to do with my company. Do they have the right to monitor what I do through my phone? The answer is yes and no, right? If you have nothing, no company's email installed on your phone, they have no reason to monitor your personal device, right? That's your private life, that's your privacy. And you should separate from your professional life. But on the other hand, if you install, I mean, for personal convenience, if I don't want to, really use my company device to check my emails, right? If I really want the convenience to have the company email to be installed on my personal device, then you have to comply to the company's policy. And often a common business practice is that if you have the company's email being stored on your personal device, there are sets of procedures and compliance because they have to protect their assets, which are the content embedded in the email, which may include valuable data, right? Which may include the customer sensitive information that you exchange through that email content. So sandboxing, build the boundary, and utilizing the company may also have certain kind of monitoring software or applications just in case that you lose your phone that has your company's email. And then they can remotely actually delete your email client immediately after you report your loss of your personal device. Those are the common business practice. So my personal recommendation is if you really want to separate your business and your personal life and build a boundary, then build a boundary among your devices, right? If you want to have the convenience of having your company's email and data to be stored on your personal device, then you probably also need to think about this security and data privacy protection from your business perspective. And these are naturally trade-offs we have to make.
That makes a lot of sense. So this is the last question that just came in. It says, how can students get involved with the Cybersecurity Governance Center at KOGOD?
Well, at KoGuard, we do, I think our signature project within our centers are from two perspectives. One is from the human factor perspective, the other is the data analytics. So as we know, majority of the research centers or the cybersecurity research agenda in this country or in this world are heavily invested towards the technological perspective, right? I would say 90% of the research and resources are devoted to the technology and infrastructure building to defend, to having these, to safeguard our information assets. So it's relatively mature and well studied in the literature, although I have to say that the field is quickly evolving. So we will also see a huge amount of new tools and new technologies, new algorithms being developed to safeguard our assets in the cyberspace. Our center, we are unique in the way that we are one of the very few centers situated or being, really developed within business school context. So we care more about, from the business perspective, what the leaders should do, what business managers should know about cybersecurity, and how we should provide effective training among employees so they understand these important trade-offs we talk about, right? So enjoy the convenience of accessing your company's digital assets, but meanwhile, you want your privacy rights, right? How we're going to do this. So the effective training for your employees are also very important for a business to safeguard their information. And I believe that you heard about this old saying that, human is actually the weakest link in cybersecurity, right? So we are actually positioned in a way to address the human factors rather than, investing heavily to the technological development. And then the second very new perspective we try to grow is about data analytics, right? We're talking about huge amount of data. We're talking about how to protect data. And meanwhile, we can also try to utilize data analytics to better detect cyber threats. For example, you can observe, human behavior, try to detect certain threats. I think we also talk about here today. And we could also, by observe and a better understand human behavior in order to develop, right, about what they do online and how they better interact with different cues and applications, so that we can better develop the awareness training programs to address the human as the weakest link for the cybersecurity, industry. So I think our cybersecurity governance center is well positioned to address human factors and data analytics perspective cybersecurity research.
Thank you. Anna, this is back to you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your answers today, Heng, and Elizabeth, for reading those questions to us from the comments. This concludes the first installment of our webinar series, COGOD Faculty on COVID. You can find Elizabeth and I back here next week, Wednesday, August 5th at 1 p.m., where we'll be joined by the director of the COGOD Tax Policy Center, Professor Caroline Bruckner. And our conversation next week will cover how women are disproportionately impacted by the economic consequences of the coronavirus. So if you have any further questions for Professor Zhu, please feel free to leave them in the comments here or message us here on Facebook. And thank you so much for joining us today, Heng, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.